So yes, so the talk I was hoping to give you more information about actually using it in practice. It's something I'm looking at doing at work because we're refactoring our API. So I was looking around, and this was something that I had come across. Well, I'll tell you how I got onto it. So that's me, and I work at a company called Encore. So why pick on MVC? You know, we kind of know what it is. We like it. Really, the question which got me thinking about this is a lot of this is coming from somebody called Paul N. Jones, who does a lot of sort of PHP stuff. It's on the PHP Fig. It does some of the Aura packages. So I kind of came across it and started listening. So MVC actually dates back to Xerox and the Palo Alto lab. So it's old. It's sort of late 70s, and ironically, actually, it fits in what they were thinking about. Fits in more with front-end frameworks than how we use it in back-end. That's kind of where they were looking at. But to be honest, that's kind of been and gone from my point of view. It was picked up again by some microsystems when they were coming up with Java servlet pages back in the late 90s. And this is kind of what's up with MVC is which MVC are we sort of talking about? So you see here with JSP, the model and the view are kind of connected together and talked a lot together, which is kind of slightly odd. We're probably more used to the one that was coming from the Symfony version 1, where the controller and the model talk together, and then the controller pushes things out to the view. Strangely, on this one, actually, the view is returning the response, which is not always the case. Actually, they've got a different diagram further down the page where it's coming back through the controller. But and you is just, it's just like a group hug, really. Controller, view, model, they all get on along together fine. They talk to each other left, right, and center. So this would be one of my takeaways, is that MVC is a lot of different things. We use the term and we think we know what we mean, and we probably do know what we mean, but it's when you start talking to other people that we could be talking about different things. And that's kind of difficult. When we all know when we're naming classes, when we're naming methods, when we're doing those sort of things, we're trying to be slightly more accurate and trying to make sure that we're conveying what's going on, because we know that if it's not somebody else, in 6 months' time, I've got no idea what the hell I wrote. So I need a bit of guidance and support. So knowing where things fit is quite key. I haven't started my timer, so I've got no idea about time. It's okay. So what is this thing ADR? So it's not hugely widely different. What it is trying to be more definite about what it is. And again, one of the takeaways I would say from this is if you don't like this, that's fine. Then you can just actually go into a discussion with somebody and say, we've got an MVC pattern, but it isn't ADR. And that's kind of cool, fine. And we kind of know a bit better what we're up to. So the action is essentially replaces the controller, domain replaces the model, responder replaces the view, and it's this sort of arrangement. So the action asks for stuff from the domain, gets it passed back, and then talks to the responder. And then the action passes back the result from the responder to the browser. I think actually Rob will recognise some of this, because I just took this example from the Slim framework, where Paul Jones basically went through the first app that's suggested in the Slim framework and said, this is the way I'd do it as ADR. So this is kind of, this is slightly more of a micro framework style, and you might, if you were doing this on a larger framework or doing it yourself, you might add in extra things. The main thing about the responder is it sends back a response object. So it's not what we think about in terms of a view. Quite often that's just a template. It's sending back the HTTP headers and the body. You can see also, I've put in this, it's a It's an array. It's the data being passed in from the domain. It's some data. So it's not a complicated model object that you could do other things with. It's just, here's the data, get on with it. This example is saying, look, I've put in lots of methods in this particular one class, but it's more likely to be that you would have one class per responder that you would have. And in terms of losing some of the things that go on with views, not all the time, but as I say, it's more than just a templating engine. With that initial symphony diagram, we're saying that it's the view that's sending back to the browser. Sometimes we do that, sometimes we don't when we're doing views. Sometimes it's just if it's an HTML view, we'll if it's an HTML response, we'll put it down into the view, get it to run things and push it back. If it's an API, then maybe we just slap a JSON encode in the controller method. If it's the fact that you haven't been able to find an object in the model, so you're asking for user 1 million and user 1 million doesn't exist, then quite often again in your action method in your controller, people will just say, okay, I'm going to return a 404 response at that stage. So the responder, it does handle all the responses. So it's responsible for errors, it's responsible for redirects, it's server errors, it's errors in terms of somebody asking for something they shouldn't or isn't there. It will also handle content negotiation as well. So maybe I've asked for an API, have I asked for a JSON object to come back to me, or have I asked for XML? I'm asking for HTML, or maybe that list of users I want back as a CSV response instead. And as I was saying before, it doesn't have access to model. It's given data and it gets on with it there. Again, slightly different. The domain is just about the model. You see, it's very simple. It's just, in this case, from their example, it's returning an array. The sort of domain model thing, I think, I think quite often we can understand where it is from the fact it started off in the late 90s. So yeah, it returns the payload as a data structure, and quite often it will also return, or it should return the status of the operation. So here, having a try-catch. So you catch any error, and then you say the status of this request was that there was a server error. But that's what it does. It passes that back, and then the responder decides, okay, so I'm going to send 500 out. And really now, one of the differences, I suppose, between what was going on in the late 90s and what's going on now is actually that domain is quite often where we're working. That's that chunk of our code, where all our business logic is. It's not simply just, this is getting stuff out of the database or putting stuff into the database. There's a lot more work there. And you might have the same domain. So say, for example, it's an e-commerce site. So you'd have your public-facing website, which would be looking at products and pulling those out and setting it up. You might have a completely different website using a similar domain to allow somebody to actually populate that product catalog that's going to be used. You might have a completely different website, which is used by your marketing people to segment the audiences and work out what they've been buying and all their demographics and doing that. So that's kind of the meaty chunk of what we do probably day to day. So difference in terms of a model is that quite often things like Cake PHP and others, you suddenly create a model and okay, so we're straight into generating SQL, or maybe some magic methods will generate SQL. And then with something like Cake, you've got other classes going on. You've got behaviors that do things with models, and it suddenly this is where MVC can become difficult. Is where do I put stuff? Is it that I'm just going to sort of really pad out that database access model and do it in there, or can I put in layers? If I put in layers, then how does that work with my framework? And yes, it's so last century really. And what I mean by that is when we were all writing websites in the late 90s, it was that you're out on your own. It was, you'd say with an e-commerce site, you'd have sort of that protection around the corporate database, everything else that's going on there, sort of invoicing, customer management, everything of that, that's there. And there's this little thing happening out actually on the information superhighway, as it was then, which we're willing to throw some money at. We're not going to throw enough money to do an API call back in or anything like that. We don't want to have any risk at all. So that's why I think we can sort of see where that model equals database layer comes from, because basically we just quite often there when we were just doing information data capture, which was going to be sent back to the main corporate system. Maybe it's emailed, maybe it's an XML download. Some poor person, if it was an e-commerce site, would be sitting there having to manually type in the product database into yet another system. And it wasn't just a technical issue either. E-commerce site was working on about 5 years ago. They manufactured their products, so they had this nice ERP system that went from the raw materials all the way up to the manufactured product in there. And yes, there was an API and I was making use of that, but the product titles that were used in their database were all inward-looking titles. It'll be this particular product version 2, this particular product version 3. It made sense to them internally because they wanted to know, version 3 would use these raw materials. They were involved with B2B selling to retailers and wholesalers mainly before. So again, that's sort of conversation that they would have with that type of person. But it's not something that you'd send out to the consumer. It wasn't marketing copy. So it wasn't just a technical issue. It was that actually the business hadn't gone through that process of change and thinking about the web. And then really the controller or the action is going to be really minimized because it's going to be lightweight. It just needs to say, I've got an HTTP request comes in. What do I do with it? I know I'm going to go and get from the domain, and then I'm going to pass it over to the responder, and I'm going to come back with response class that I can then fire up back to the user, to the browser. This again, it's sort of micro frameworky, so it's using an anonymous function, but yeah, it's one of the things that would be more likely to be a class, and also it would be a class on its own. So rather than the controller having function action index, function action add, function action delete, function action blah blah blah, it would be a separate class for each of those actions. And actually, this is where I sort of came in, because I just didn't like that class with being a big pot that you threw things into. Because it ends up as a catch-all class. Because again, one of the things we know about writing functions, writing methods, is we kind of want one layer of abstraction and then call a sub-function, sub-method. And so if you're putting starting off with a lot of actions, methods in your class, and you're then having supporting methods for that, so you've got this massive class, and trying to work out what is that should be and shouldn't be in there. Can I use inheritance to try and bring things in that are similar across the board? As I was saying before about the responder, it doesn't get involved with the headers, and quite often you'll see action methods that deal with the things that haven't worked out or redirects, and also it doesn't get involved with the JSON data or XML data that's coming in. So I put this up, and so this is kind of the original article that was there. There's a talk that you can hear, which is probably a lot more eloquent than mine, and they're saying there's an example of how to change the first application that's talked about on the Slim framework, how to do it suggested in ADR. So quick recap is kind of, at the moment I can't say, yeah, it's brilliant, let's all go ahead and do it, because we haven't gone full bore on it at work. On the other hand, I think one of the important things to say at the beginning is, if we're talking about MVC, we need to be clear what we really mean there, because it's quite open for confusion. And yeah, it's worth having a try, giving it a whirl. And if you don't like it, fine. I say you've got something that's labelled now that you can say it's not that, it's something else. So come up with your own acronym instead and do it. Okay. Any questions? Apart from, is there any pizza yet?
I'll answer that question last.
Oh, I don't know. Any?
Is it possible to implement ADR right now in any framework you use, or do you need a different new framework altogether?
Yes, yeah. I mean, I think one of the things when I was looking around at this, I mean, obviously, micro frameworks, you can get anyone to do that there. One of the questions somebody raised was about Symfony, and the response coming back from people behind Symfony now was, it's not an MVC framework. It's reading the answer, it seemed to be they're kind of geared up more towards MVC in terms of sort of scaffolding and auto-generating things, but it's not that you can't do it. You could do it, and maybe you'd have to then write some sort of supporting scripts to help generate the classes that you want.
If you use Slim, obviously released a plugin to that makes using Slim framework as a responder type thing.
Okay, cool. Excellent. Okay, Slim is, for some reason, it's popular here. I don't know why. Sorry.
You mentioned that the responder could handle content negotiation, but it would need to have access to the request to be able to do that, wouldn't it?
Yes, yeah. So you could pass that in, or you could filter out just things like the accept coming through, the accept types that somebody's looking for. Potentially also, I've seen examples where it's been looking at the language, preferred language. So use that to do your multilingual part. So yeah, that'd be something that you could pass in. I think in the examples I've seen, it would be passing in an accept object which had those details, and then passing in the payload, and some of the later revisions where it's been talking about the payload, it would be a class, and from the class you'd say, that was delete worked, or delete didn't work, add worked, add didn't work, and using the class being able to then decide, is that a successful response or not? It was a successful response. Yeah. Any more for anyone? I think Andy. No, Andy. You're pointing, were you? Good pointing there, Andy. Okay. Thanks. That's it. Cheers.